Assalamu alaikum. This is Ali Farooq. Guys, we are back with Dr. Khalid Zaheer. Khalid Saab, welcome back.
Thank you.
So in the previous episodes, we have obviously with the session we've had with Khalid Saab, we have covered a little bit about himself and his perspective of Javed Ahmed Ghamidi. Today, Khalid Saab, I would like to take your perspective on the school of thought in itself. And I don't even know if you want to call it a school of thought, but what does Javed Ahmed Ghamidi Saab bring to the table, right? And why should people listen to it? So first, your perspective on that. Is it a fikr? Is it a school of thought? Is it just an opinion about the same thing people want to understand in religion? How do you take it?
It's a way of understanding God's religion, and what he brings to the table is clarity. If you would ask me one most outstanding virtue of Ghamidi Saab, it's clarity. And it's the absence of clarity in other points of view that actually makes him stand out. His contributions are many. If you would ask me to enlist some of the more prominent ones, I would say that probably he's one of those people, including his ustaz and the ustaz of his ustaz, who have made it absolutely clear to everyone, all Muslims, that it is God's book, the Quran, which is the ultimate criterion which enables us to sift good from bad, right from wrong. I think that's what brings clarity into his way of thinking. One of the other remarkable things that he's done is that he has made us clearly understand that it's not the Quran which is the only source of guidance for Muslims. It is the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, who is the source of religion. And he has given us the Quran and the Sunnah. And Sunnah, like the Quran, is absolutely authentic and reliable, which is amazing. And then a third thing which many people don't realize is that he has given us an understanding of hadith, which makes us place hadith in its right position. It's a proper perspective. And as a consequence, as I said, what you get is an absolutely clear picture of what Islam is. Obviously, the details have to be sorted out. And there is an ongoing process of research that is needed. But we are absolutely clear now that God's religion can be understood as to what it is and where it comes from.
Yeah, and I would like to dive into a little bit more about the methodology applied. How is the reasoning applied, and what is the science behind it? But I want to tell the audience that the intention of this program is that you as an audience understand that there is an opinion out there that's probably worth understanding for things that bother you, for questions that you have and not being answered properly, or they were answered you're not convinced about, or in general religion, right? How you should go and understand religion. So we're going to try to do this in these 15 minutes with Khalid Saab a little bit. So Khalid Saab, think about the audience being people who are relatively young and who are a little bit confused about how to understand religion, right? And I want to talk about all the three things you said, Quran, Sunnah, and Hadith, right? And then I also want to, again, for you to come back to from a Ghamidi Saab's thought perspective, right? What I understood so far is that there is an opinion that he provides with clarity about religion, how to understand religion, and about the topics in religion. Did I say it clearly and correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. So if someone has to understand religion, do they start from Quran?
Okay. You see, it all depends on what the topic is. I mean, if you're talking about, let's say, prayers, formal prayers, salat, Quran is going to remind you about the fact that you've got to pray, but you will not take the way you would pray from the Quran, because the Quran doesn't tell you how to pray.
Sure.
So you'll take it from the Sunnah. So it all depends on what the subject is, what the topic is. However, no matter what the topic, if it's religious in nature, it cannot go against the Quran. The Quran is the ultimate judge, ultimate criterion. Before we move on to other questions, let me also clarify. One of the things that Ghamidi Saab has done most effectively and brilliantly is to clarify that when it comes to seeking the truth, if you really want to be truthful, if you want to know the truth properly, you cannot afford to be emotional in your pursuit. You have to be
Objective?
absolutely objective and intellectual in your endeavors. Emotions should come later. In many cases, probably in most cases where there are differences, people are not listening to the other person because people are emotionally attached to a certain point of view. So I think that's another important thing that he has brought to the table, which I think should be taken seriously.
So maybe you're coming from the perspective, understanding and assuming that a person has already gone through a traditional school of thought, and of course there's confusion in him. But let me take it back a little bit. Let's suppose me, for example, I'm trying to understand what is Islam, right? And I feel it's very traditional, very orthodox, and a little bit old school. This is a perspective, right? And there are certain modern aspects that it has not been able to keep up based on how I was told what Islam was, right? So I have this problem that this is a religion that cannot keep up with the times. This is a religion that cannot keep up with an understanding for the people who are not Muslims. Like if someone looking at you from outside, right? So now for me, what does Al-Mawrid, the school of thought that Ghamidi bring, offer, and how should I start getting the right understanding? Should I start from Quran?
You see, Ali, you have three things with you. You are an intelligent young person, and therefore you have got a number of questions about what life is all about. You have an understanding that there is a religion called Islam, which you have inherited from your parents, and you have this modern world with you.
Yeah.
Now you've got to fit in all these things together.
Yeah.
The claim about this religion is that it's from God. The difficulty with you is that some part of the claim makes sense, but some other part of it doesn't make sense.
Yes.
And there are questions out there in the market which are bothering you.
Yeah.
Now, where do you start from? Well, you would start from the question that is bothering you. Take one question, go to the Quran, read the Quran, you will get an answer, probably in some cases, and most certainly not in other cases. You'll get confused. So sooner or later, you will end up asking somebody, I have this question, the Quran says one thing, but my understanding based on modern knowledge says something different.
Yes.
So how should I resolve? No sooner you get to the Quranic text and then to some religious scholar, you are on the path, on the journey of learning Islam.
Yes.
You should not give up. You should take it seriously, and you should be dead honest in your investigation.
I see. So I pick up things that confuse me, and it could be a topic, as you said, and then I go and obviously reference Quran. So where does the Sunnah come in and Hadith then?
You see, when you look at Islam as a message that the Almighty wants us to follow, you would find that the Quran is making references to some rituals, which even though they are mentioned, you don't know, you can't figure out how to do them, how to follow them. Take the example of Hajj. It's an annual pilgrimage to the house of God. We know where the house of God is, but we don't know how the rituals are to be undertaken.
Yeah.
But there is very little mention in the Quran. So you would be informed that when the Quran was referring to Hajj, it was referring to a definite set of rituals which were already there, followed and practiced by people. And all of them agree that these are the rituals of Hajj. This is what Sunnah is. That is, the religious practices of all prophets that have come down to us through the unanimity and uninterrupted continuity of human beings.
Oh.
And in the case of the last prophet, may God's mercy be on him, whatever was changed, altered, was brought back to its pristine form.
Yes.
And thereafter, it's the complete agreement of the companions, which have been transmitted now through uninterrupted continuity, that we have those practices with us. So now we have the Quran, the text, as well as these practices, which are the core message of Islam, the pillar sources. Hadith is a historical record, which is natural. If you'll ask me questions about it, I'll tell you, because it's a very complicated subject. But I think, as I said earlier, one of the great contributions of Ghamidi Sahib is that he has made this complicated subject appear very simple and understandable.
Yeah, very good. I think the word you used, uninterpreted continuity, was very beautiful, and I get it because of my background in trying to understand history, where in my terms, the historical law is set up based on that. How is a fact is a historical fact is because everyone in the previous generations agreed to unanimously to whatever was done previously, and the generation behind. So it is continuously coming up from the hierarchy, right? And it becomes a historical fact because there's never been a doubt to that, right? So that becomes Sunnah.
Absolutely.
But for the young generation out here, the challenge is they listen to a lot of traditional Islam, even from the people who are very eloquent in explaining Islam. In the end up to something which is a little bit, in my word, with lack of a better word, a little bit sometimes appears to be silly. Like why would Allah Ta'ala ask us to do that, kind of, right? And a lot of times the defense comes from hadith, right? And I'm not trying to be very technical in that conversation. I'm just trying to understand the methodology applied from your side, and you yourself are an Al-Mawrid scholar, so how you guys would approach it. But there's one element where people say you cannot understand Quran without hadith. And that's how maybe some of the teachers of people out here say that. But on the other hand, when you talk to the general youth, they would say, how can something be so authentic when it came across and it is a reference from just few people? And that person also is not directly referring to Rasulullah, he's referring to someone who heard from Rasulullah, right? So the authenticity is an issue. And I know there has been Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, and there's a Zaif Hadith. But I think that there needs to be a scientific approach to this, and I feel that's a little bit of what Al-Mawrid has done. I'm sorry, my question is long, but just what's your response to that?
Yeah, you see, the key topics are A, clarity.
Okay.
And B, absence of emotionalism. People have learned their religion from tradition, and what they have learned is, allow me to say, confusing. It's complicated.
Yes.
It's not adding up. But because they've already believed in it to be God's religion, they're emotionally attached to it. And they don't want to part with it. Because they fear that if they're going to part with what they've already accepted as God's religion, they lose their faith. So in comes Ghamidi Saab's contribution. He says that don't have any fear of losing your faith. Your faith, in fact, is going to be strengthened and enhanced if you understand God's religion more clearly. So I go back to the equation.
Okay.
The Quran, the word of God; Sunnah, the religious practices of the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, which, like the Quran, are absolutely authentic. And then there is a large body of knowledge called Hadith, which is natural, but unlike the Quran and Sunnah, it's not absolutely, completely authentic and reliable.
Yes.
It's natural because you can't imagine that a large number of people believed in and followed the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, saw him, doing things and saying, making statements, and they would not have transmitted this information to the later generations. They did it, and it was natural. And it was also natural that there would be some people who would investigate to find out whether these people who are transmitting this information are they reliable people or not. So we have in the 3rd century Hijrah, by and large, great body of knowledge called Hadith, Khabre Ahad. This knowledge is so impressive that people have started taking it more seriously than the Quran and Sunnah, not realizing that the Quran and Sunnah are the original sources, pillar sources of God's religion. These are the two sources which were given to us by the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, and nothing else. Hadith is what people have given us. It's not unimportant. It's not something to be rejected. It's a body of knowledge that needs to be carefully understood and placed as a footnote to the Quran and Sunnah.
Yeah, and I'm hoping if you can shed some light, and it might be a little bit more technical, and I'm not sure if we're ready for explaining to the audience here. But the other day we were having a conversation where we understood that a lot of work has been done on Hadith.
Oh, yes.
In the countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, where they have kind of archived in a library format and then trace Hadith back from origin, and the concept of the messenger, the Ravi, who brings it, and then you can actually have scientific application on it. And as a result, you're able to understand maybe this hadith might not be authentic enough because there's some weaknesses in the system of how to trace it, right? The reason I'm talking about this is because in my very humble understanding, a lot of confrontation and challenges among us for the same topics have been because of how hadith is interpreted. I'm sorry, my question is long again. What I'm trying to understand from you is the application when you have a challenge of how a person can apply and understand what is the right methodology applied to understand what God was saying. For example, inheritance, you talked about it in previous topics. Parda, topics that interest us, about access, to music and access to other worldly things and not just religion itself. There's a lot of people who forget taking care of the things that are around them, their children, their parents and stuff, and they just focus on religion. There's so many things, right? Because maybe hadith kind of confuse them. Or it could be like Eid ka Chand issue or Taraweeh issue, Salatul Tasbih issue. There's like unending hundreds and hundreds of issues. Do you want to shed light? Do you think, is there application or methodology that is applied out here?
Most certainly. You see, you have a topic at hand which is interesting, which interests you. Just find out. The first thing that you would want to find out is it mentioned in the Quran or not?
Okay, first thing.
If it's not mentioned in the Quran, then be absolutely sure that it is not a topic, subject which is of fundamental significance to Islam. Had it been important, the Almighty Himself would have mentioned it in the Quran. We have religious practices in the name of, in the form of Sunnah, but they're just practices. When you're talking about concepts, when you're talking about ideas, they have to be in the Quran. If you find that they're not in the Quran and they are in the Hadith literature, then you've got two things to do. One is more technical, and the other is probably based on more of common sense. It's technical as well, but you can understand it through your common sense. The technical part is what is called the criterion of riwayat. You find out, meticulously going into the details of what kind of people these narrators were. There's a large database of these individuals called Asma or Rijal. Something like more than 100,000 people were involved in the 3-4 generations who transmitted this information called hadith. But obviously for most of us, lay people who do not know the technicalities of it, you rightly mentioned that there's a lot of work that has been done in the recent times in order for us to be able to find out more how this work was carried out and what were the problems and issues associated with it. But let's come to the other criterion, which is the criterion of darayat, which is actually trying to find out as to whether what is claimed to be said, referred to by the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, can it be religion? Well, you will look at the Quran and try to relate the hadith with the Quran. If you are able to find that there is some mention in the Quran, which is what this hadith is explaining, well, you've done the job. You'll be satisfied. But if that's not the case, you'll use your common sense and find out as to whether the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, may have said something which was relevant to his own times, and he was giving an instruction that was needed for his immediate project to be accomplished, and so on. So, we will do some work, and hopefully in each case you will come to a conclusion which will satisfy you.
No, I think this is very well said. Basically, the way I understand it is that if you have a topic that bothers you want to understand, first of all, you have to understand how it was addressed in Quran or not. And then if it was not addressed in Quran, then why is it really a topic of religion or not? A lot of times we bring religion to everything. It could be very culture. And then if is there some addressability of that through the Sunnah, which comes from uninterrupted continuity, as you said. Right? From generations to generations. And for example, for the audience, like people memorize Quran, and it has moved on from one generation to the other generation, and it's called uninterrupted continuity. So we can say for sure that this is the real Quran that we know, right? So, and if not, then we go to a hadith for also reference. But a lot of times, if you really are serious about the topic, you need to find out the traceability. And there's a concept called mutawatir hadith, I know, which might be a bit more technical. So I want to continue in that in the second session for this episode. But I think simplifying, and see if it's in Quran, if not, is in it Sunnah or not. If it's a hadith, let's check out the validity of the hadith, and the topic will be answered correctly. So, Khalid Saab, we'll continue this because this is an interesting topic in the second session as well. Audience, thank you for this episode. We'll have this next one soon. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.